Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
The findings of a long-term study were just released through the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, and it is astonishing. In this particular study, and this just came out, that was looking at close to 7,000 women in the United States. And this was through the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. And this was actually titled, What We Eat in America. And they conducted this data pooling between the years 2011 and 2016. And they had these women who were in this particular study do a dietary recall and dietary supplement questionnaire. And they wanted to really look and see how much of their vitamins were they getting from either supplements or just from their intake of food alone. And I want to get into this in some detail because it really is quite shocking. And it always goes back to why I say, follow the Mediterranean diet, and there's a reason why. So I want to talk about some of the findings in this particular study and then kind of highlight a couple of different areas as to why we know this is so problematic. So I'm Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and let's get right to it. Let's talk about this study, the What We Eat in America. I mean, you could have just stopped right there and we'd say, okay, we know that that's not so great. But I want to talk about what they actually found. And they found that among women of childbearing age, 50% had an intake of vitamin A from food that was less than the estimated average requirement. And this is the amount that you need to have in order to just meet the standards. And 50% of them did not have a high enough vitamin A intake. And then when you look at vitamin C, D, E, calcium, magnesium, those percentages were also very alarming. So for vitamin C, for example, 47% of these women, and remember, this is close to 7,000 women, 47% of those women did not have a high enough vitamin C intake. 97% of these women did not have enough vitamin D intake. Yes, 97% did not have enough vitamin D in their diet. 92% did not have enough vitamin E. 49% did not have enough calcium. And a whopping 62% did not have enough magnesium. And so what this really kind of indicates is that the foods are lacking nutrients. Clearly, this is a problem. And so if women are not supplementing, which they found that to be the case, that they weren't even getting the bare minimums through a multivitamin, then this inadequate nutrient intake was a potential for driving different metabolic dysfunctions as well as different chronic disease states. Now, interestingly enough, sodium intake exceeded the chronic disease risk reduction within this study. So the women had entirely too much sodium, but then they lacked in everything else. So this is why when you look at heart disease and we look at the different peripheral vascular diseases, for example, we see why this is so high, especially in women, because this is a lot of the focus oftentimes is, heart disease in women. But if we look and see, okay, well, you're lacking key things such as vitamin D, vitamin E, magnesium, these are kind of crucial to cardiovascular function, but yet you have way too much sodium, then it makes sense. And where's that sodium coming from? Because a lot of times I'll talk to folks and they say, oh, no, I don't put salt on anything. Well, if you're eating processed food, you are getting salt. And it doesn't matter which way you cut it up. you're getting salt if you are doing processed foods. And we know that the majority of Americans do eat processed foods. They're not eating fresh fruits and vegetables. They are eating things that are prepackaged, easy, quick meals on the go, because they've made us think that we do not have time to feed ourselves healthy foods. So we've all just kind of become accustomed to this, and it's not a good thing for our overall health. Now, this wasn't just from self-reporting. So oftentimes when we talk about these types of studies, and in this one, like I said, close to 7,000 women who actually participated in this, you say, well, maybe they just didn't have good recall. Maybe there's some bias there because they weren't reporting, their intake of certain foods appropriately. But they actually looked at their blood markers. And what they found from, identifying in the blood samples was that there was a substantial portion of those women who were at risk for B12 deficiency, vitamin D deficiency, iron deficiency, iodine deficiency. And if it wasn't deficient, then it was at minimum insufficient. And that's scary because think about what you need all of those things for. Think about the utilization of B12 in the body, vitamin D in the body. Why is iron important? When you think about thyroid function, for example. Same thing with iodine, clearly, with thyroid function. But let's just take a step back from this particular study, because what they concluded was in their findings, along with multiple other published literature, that dietary supplementation of these nutrients may be one important way for overcoming nutrient inadequacies in women of various life stages. Okay, so why is it that your doctor is always telling you that you don't need a multivitamin? You're good, just get it from your food. Well, we see we're not getting it from the food. And the foods we are taking in are not giving us the right nutrients. So I want to talk about a study that came out from the American Osteopathic Association. And this is quite important because let's go back and look at the stats from the 7,000 women. Remember, 97% of them did not have adequate vitamin D. 62% of them did not have adequate magnesium intake. Okay, so keep those two numbers in your head. Now let's look at the study out of the American Osteopathic Association. Vitamin D can't be metabolized without sufficient magnesium levels. That's their headline. Vitamin D cannot be metabolized without sufficient magnesium levels, meaning vitamin D remains stored and inactive for as many as 50% of Americans. So you have all these people that say, oh, no, I get enough exposure to vitamin D in my diet. So is it your magnesium that's creating the issue? Well, clearly that's the correlation. And this was published in the Journal of the American Osteopathic Association, finding that this vitamin D problem in this country is driven because of a magnesium insufficiency or deficiency. So when you say, okay, vitamin D can't properly be absorbed if we don't have enough magnesium. And then we look at these numbers and we say, okay, 62% of these women don't have adequate magnesium intake, and hence 97% have a problem with their vitamin D. So we know what the problem is. We know what the solution is. But yet, many in the traditional medical world still don't recognize or talk about this. And they say that magnesium consumption, this is from the same study here, American Osteopathic Association. Magnesium consumption from natural foods has decreased in the past few decades, owing to industrialized agriculture and changes in dietary habits. So I've talked before about the study that they did with the soil samples at University of Texas, where they looked at soil from 1950 and looked at the mineral and vitamin content of that, and then fast forward into the 2000s and voila, wow, we are really lacking in these nutrients. And then you look and say, well, in 1950, people weren't going through fast food like they are now. So you look at the imbalance of nutrient intake, and you can see that clear distinction. And I think that's important to know, because many times when people take vitamin D, I would say if you're not also taking magnesium, you're doing yourself a disservice. And we already know that most people in this country don't get adequate magnesium exposure. So at minimum, a multivitamin that has magnesium in it. But for the majority of Americans, you're going to need an additional magnesium. So magnesium glycinate, magnesium citrate. And how much do you take? Well, it really depends on, your body's response to it. I always say with magnesium, you start low and slow. Maybe you start with 200 milligrams of magnesium per day. And then also take your multivitamin. Take your vitamin D. How much vitamin D should you take per day? That's always a question that comes up too. I don't know. I don't have one of those, magic balls that I can look into and say, okay, this is the number. But what we do know is you can get your blood levels tested. And if your level is low, then you start supplementing, and then you go back in and retest maybe 3 months later. And if the level is coming up nicely, then you know that that's probably the correct amount for you. If it's staying stagnant, then you know I need a lot more of the vitamin D. And I also have to make sure I'm taking my magnesium to make sure that the vitamin D can be absorbed properly. And we know the role, the importance of vitamin D. Remember, this is more of a hormone in the body than it is a vitamin. It was probably misnamed many years ago. And we know that vitamin D deficiency is truly, it's a global pandemic. And we know that in this country, it clearly is an issue. We know the role that vitamin D plays in the body, and understanding that it goes well beyond that of, strong bones and bone development. We certainly realize that vitamin D is playing a role in cell differentiation, which is why it's been correlated to cancers. So if someone that has vitamin D deficiency, are they more prone potentially to bad cell division and cancer? Yes, we have seen this. We have also seen the association of vitamin D status and the severity of autoimmune diseases, including type 1 diabetes, MS, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Parkinson's disease, which doesn't fall into the autoimmune, but we definitely know that when someone has low vitamin D, your immune system is going to struggle. Understanding the role that there is an inverse relationship between circulating vitamin D levels and the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. There are so many different randomized, placebo-controlled trials that are out there that have looked into the true importance of vitamin D when it comes to cognitive decline, when it comes to disease progression of certain chronic disease states, which is why we know vitamin D is so important. So the findings in this study that was reported out in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition just this month, looking at those 7,000 American women and in the What We Eat in America study, and to see those alarming numbers and to see the deficiencies. And you can even look at vitamin C and say, oh, okay, 47% are not getting adequate vitamin C. And keep in mind that when we talk about that they are not meeting the adequate level, these are already low bar levels that are set. These are just, scraping by levels. Think about vitamin C and skin health. For example, you have to have adequate vitamin C for collagen to properly cross-link. And if you don't have adequate vitamin C, then that's going to be a problem for your skin. Maybe you have more defined lines and wrinkles. Perhaps you have vascular issues because the vascular system is reliant on vitamin C. Perhaps you have issues with vision because those retinal cells are heavily reliant on vitamin C. Think about vitamin E. It plays a role in terms of cholesterol transport and being one of the body's most important antioxidants for fending off oxidative stress. And if we're not getting exposure to this, then that's a problem. So what's the solution? Well, first and foremost is we try to adhere to a healthier diet. So we know a Mediterranean diet is definitely going to provide us with a higher amount of those vitamins and minerals. But we also have to recognize that in and of itself often is still not enough. So taking a multivitamin, such as the women's multivitamin from Invite Health, which is a comprehensive multivitamin, multi-mineral formulation that contains the bioactive forms of methylcobalamin, which is B12, methylfolate, which is your folic acid, but in its active form. This is a non-GMO multivitamin. It is made with these really, really powerful antioxidants, a full spectrum vitamin E that contains your tocopherols plus those tocotrienols. All of these are contained in the women's multivitamin, along with very important things such as collagen, as well as DIM. And DIM we get from cruciferous vegetables. And one thing that we know about DIM is very beneficial for helping to support and maintain healthy hormonal balance. So when you're using the women's multivitamin, you are getting that full spectrum of everything to support the immune system, to support energy, overall wellness, vision, because this also has within it has the vision blend in this, containing things like astaxanthin and zeaxanthin and lutein and lycopene. And we have to make sure that we cover those bases, those gaps that we are not getting. And it truly is important because study after study just continues to reinforce why it is that we need to pay attention to the nutrients that we take in. As a matter of fact, there was another study that came out that was published in the Journal of Nutrition showing a lower risk of mortality when people had higher levels of folate. So I just mentioned that the women's multivitamin had the bioactive form, the methylfolate. Now, this particular study, they were looking at over 3,000 residents in Japan that were over the age of 40 years old, and they wanted to look at their intake of things like folate and B12 from the diet, and they were able to also look at serum blood levels, and they found that higher intake of folate could actually reduce the risk of all-cause mortality, in particular for cardiovascular disease. So we know that those vitamins and minerals are in our body for a reason, and we also know that when we are lacking sufficient amounts of those vitamins and minerals, that we start to pay the price over time. So do make sure that you're eating healthy and that you, at minimum, have a good comprehensive multivitamin, multi-mineral. Check out the Women's Multi on our website, invitehealth.com. And I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and you leave us a review. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health. And we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.